Well, to South Africa now, where soldiers have been deployed to help quell violence that erupted after former President Jacob Zuma's jailing over the weekend and arrest by pro-Zuma protesters in his home province of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng broke out, leaving at least 6 people dead. According to the military, disturbances have since worsened. Opportunistic criminals appear to be taking advantage of the anger some feel over Zuma's incarceration by stealing and destroying property. Police say about 219 arrests have been made so far. President Cyril Ramaphosa has condemned the violence, saying it is damaging efforts to rebuild the economy after the COVID-19 pandemic.
While there are those who may be hurt and angry at this moment, there can never be any justification whatsoever for anybody to embark on violent and disruptive actions that negatively affect the rights of others. Let us be clear as a nation that we will not tolerate any acts of criminality. We will not tolerate any acts of vandalism. Those who are involved in acts of violence will be arrested and prosecuted.
Or earlier, we had mentioned that we would have more analysis around those pro-Zuma protests currently in South Africa to give us a clearer on-the-ground depiction of how this could be impacting the country's economy. We're now joined by Langa Madonko, who is co-founder of investment manager firm Summit Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Langa. Langa, what has the reaction to these protests been from the business sector?
Yeah, I think from the business perspective, there's an element of worry around some of the looting and the insurrection and the damage of property. There's also a worry about how long these protests will go on and how much further damage will be done to businesses, and also what the fallout will look like post the coming down of the people in light of these protests and riots that have taken place. We are yet still to count the cost of what it will mean for the economy, particularly considering how South Africa already has its own crisis in terms of unemployment and lack of opportunities, and this has further exacerbated that.
Langa, there had been some calling the sentencing of Zuma a triumph for law in the country and that it had strong potential to encourage investors. What do you think investors are making of these violent protests now?
Yeah, I think there definitely was a positive sentiment that came out in terms of, is South Africa a place where there's the maintenance of the rule of law? There was positive sentiment to say this is protection of the constitution. But I think this may have set it back because I think it does prove that, for lack of a better term, in the underbelly of the South African system, there are underlying tensions. And I don't think this is merely linked to the arrest of Zuma. There are some social issues that are coming to the fore. Some of the protesters have commented that this is for them about issues of hunger, about issues of unemployment, and about issues of the lockdown and how that is continuing to impact them and their livelihoods. And those are definitely not going to be positive sentiment because security of tenure, security of property are big issues for investors making investments into the country.
Very huge issues that you highlight there, Langa. But say now the Constitutional Court does review Zuma's sentence and it say that that was going to start happening from today and go on to be a lot much easier on him with regards to his sentence due to his protests. What message do you think that would send to South Africa as a whole and the business sector, both locally and internationally?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that one has to consider is that the current judgment that was made against the former president relates particularly to his contempt of court, in terms of him not appearing at the competition, at the commission, the Zondo Commission, which is looking into the issues of state capture in South Africa. And it is not necessarily something that deals with many of the other allegations that may have been made with regards to corruption and so forth and so on. So in the instance, there are advocates of both sides who have spoken to why there is a need to be lenient, and others who have said there's a need for them to maintain the sentence where it is. And I think from an investor perspective, one has to be looking at what the arguments and what the rationales are in both instances. If it is merely the pressure coming from the streets and a failure from the authorities to deal with the riots that leads to him being released, then we do have a constitutional and social crisis. But if it is based on arguments that are put forward in court, if it is based on the arguments that were put forward today in his appeal for the rescission of sentence, then that's a different place, because it shows that we have a healthy and alive constitution and justice system.
Langa, a few people would argue against peaceful protests. We see them in various parts of the world. It's when they turn violent that there is concern, and more so for South Africa, which already battles with high violence. You'd spoken about some social ills that already exist and are coming to the fore because of these protests now that we're seeing. What does the business sector want to see with regard to overall violence in South Africa and how it's tackled in the country?
So I think zoning in specifically on this present instance, I think the first thing that everybody wants to see is a situation whereby the government acts decisively, the authorities bring a quick end to this, and then it's also about how do we go forward in terms of working in the South African context to deal with the numerous social ills. Because I think in as much as we've had these protests and we have said they are linked to the incarceration of the former president, like I'm saying, the theme is coming across that there are numerous other issues that are embedded into this. And in South Africa, it has been a trend that in many instances when there's a protest, it can turn violent. And that volatility that is sitting underneath the belly of the South African situation is what needs to be dealt with. I think there are issues of social cohesion here, there are issues of unemployment, there are issues of lack of opportunities, and there are issues of the impact that COVID has had, which has further exacerbated the situation. And I think it's a much, much broader conversation that needs to be had. And that conversation also needs to be had, remembering that we need to speak to our investors about how we're looking to resolve all the issues that we're currently dealing with.
Langa, so good speaking with you. Thank you so much for all your insight. Langa Madonko, he is co-founder of investment manager firm Summit Africa.